I want to welcome everybody to the February Lyceum, which is a monthly presentation hosted by First Parish in Bedford. And today we have a presentation with our local poet, Joyce Peseroff. Joyce will be reading from her sixth book of poems called Petition, which was published in November by Carnegie Mellon University Press. And she'll go on to discuss her writing process in general and some of the vital supports she's had as in a writing group. Joyce founded and directed the creative writing MFA program at UMass Boston, and she taught there for 17 years. Her honors include grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Massachusetts Artists Foundation, as well as a Pushcart Prize. In her fifth book of poems, Know Thyself, was named a must-read by the 2016 Massachusetts Book Award. And we wanted to welcome Joyce. And just before we start, if we can go to the next slide, please. I wanted to just let people know our Lyceum presentations are recorded and then made available on YouTube. If you do not want your Q&A comments posted to YouTube, please let me know at mountainbreeze52@gmail.com. Otherwise, let's take it away.
Well, thank you, Ellen, and thanks to everyone involved with First Parish and the Bedford Lyceum for inviting me here today. And I want to thank all of you at the other end of the Zoom link who came to hear poems from my new book, Petition, on this glorious winter afternoon. The book Petition deals with the ordinary struggles we face in daily life, emotional, moral, personal, political, and our desire to repair the world, no matter how imperfectly. It's about family and memories and the pressure of change in the world around us. Most of my poems come from ordinary actions, going to the dry cleaners, taking a walk, watching TV, cleaning the basement, remembering the past. And also my reading. I read a lot of articles, a lot of things online, novels, and also other poets. My reading makes its way into my life, and so it does into this book. And I'll point out when and where. I'm probably going to mix in a discussion of my process and my support from my writing group while I'm presenting the poems rather than separate them. So I'm going to sort of have a little narrative before and after each poem. I wouldn't have this book without the attention of my writing group. Two other poets, Teresa Cater and Stephen Kramer, we've been meeting together for almost 2 decades, I think. We've midwifed books for each other. We try to meet every week. That doesn't always work out, but nothing gets by without their stamp of approval. I'll mention places where specific suggestions shaped an individual poem as I read each poem. And I'm going to start with the title poem, which is called Petition. A lot of poems that I write sort of accrete themselves line by line and step by step. This wasn't like that. This is one of those that are given to a writer. And the imperatives, there's a bunch of commands in this poem. And they came from reading and examining the issues around me, including those brought up by Black Lives Matter and the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, And even though they're not mentioned in the poem, we're in the atmosphere that engendered it. Petition. Give the wealth back to those we stole it from. Give the land back to those we stole it from. Give our shotguns to those we took the land from. Maybe they'll split the barrels into irrigation pipes. Maybe they'll mill the stocks for bookends, for books, by those we took language from. Give love back to those we banished from our love. Give life back to all who lost insurance for their meds. Give medicine back to those who find it in a tea, a weed, a willow, the heat and light in hands kneading a muscle. Give muscle to the tongue's backtalk, curses, and its sweetest nothings, the lay of a ripe peach. Give ripeness to a time. Give us time to restore the forests and the sea we filtered of whales, codfish, and pink dolphins. Give us eternity again. We'll set things right. So this is a litany. It's a series of repetitions that are linked. And after I finished several drafts, I brought it to my writing group, and they took a look at it. And a litany can go on and on. A list can be endless. So my group helped me decide which were the best and which belonged and which could be cut because they did something another item on this list did better. And they also helped me with some variation in the sentences. They're all imperatives: give the land, give the wealth, give our shotguns. But a poem needs to work with both repetition and variation. You think of a rhyme scheme with some rhymes exact, like walk and talk, and some slant, a little unexpected, walk and work. So I wanted the basic structure to be the series of commands, but I also needed some of the variations, and that's how my group helped me with that. The next poem I'm going to read is from my daily life. The incident in this poem happened a few summers ago. Where I live in Bedford, homeless people I don't think are obvious, and I don't know that the woman in this poem was homeless. But I've been reading about the novelist Toni Morrison, who just died, and so part of her work and her language makes it into this poem. The title is a quote from an essay of hers. "For the stranger is not foreign, she is random." Toni Morrison, The Origin of Others. Everything I know tells me to retreat from this woman on the bench in front of the nail spa, asking if I'll take her home. She's in pants and long knit sleeves, though it's 90 degrees. While I brought shirts to the dry cleaner next door, she was pacing, talking, no cell phone or Bluetooth. Now she calls to me. Will I drive her to Lexington instead of ripping husks from sweet corn at Whole Foods? Her gray hair's trimmed, neat. She may be younger than me. It's hot. She has no purse. Wrong to call the police, agreed. I could offer to pay for a cab. Feed my sheep, the gospel choirs. Don't talk to strangers, Mom warned me, and I warned Liz. What could this anxious beggar do I couldn't undo? Timid. Jeff calls my driving as if to summarize my life. So I refer to my family in here, my daughter Liz and my husband Jeff. I do that in my poems. And because this came out of daily life, I was thinking about how little decisions we made add up to life at the end. And when I brought this poem to my writing group, I found that they suggested that I cut some lines that originally came after the final two. That wasn't how the poem originally ended. I often find that a draft of a poem needs to lose the runway. Sometimes there's a preamble, what's meant to get the poem off the ground, but it's not really necessary. You need to start the story where the story starts, not introduce it. And also sometimes a taxiway to bring it to a stop. You go on longer than you really need to. Airplanes need these things, but poems don't. So my group suggested I should end with that judgment. This next poem comes from my reading. It's a book by, some of you might know about, by Peter Wollebens, called The Hidden Life of Trees. And it's fascinating. It's about trees, how trees communicate, how they grow, and how they're almost or sentient beings. The book's been a subject of lots of articles, and I've also read poems based on the information in this book, which really I felt I have to write about this, and apparently I was not alone. So I also wanted to include a reference to the tradition of planting trees in the memory of the deceased. There's a tradition among Jews of planting trees in Israel in memory of loved ones. So I went online to find out what kind of tree was usually planted. I didn't want to say tree, I wanted to have olive or cedar, something specific. And I found the article that supplies the ending to this poem, something I didn't expect to find or to include at all. It turns out that some unscrupulous men were taking money from people who wanted to go and plant a tree themselves for a loved one. And as soon as one group left, those newly planted trees would be uprooted to make space for the next group the men would take money from. So this is called The Hidden Life of Trees. Trees want to be tight, dense forests. I read in a book, manufactured from their bodies. A seedling planted solo suffers like a prisoner locked in solitary, while the forest's a gang sharing candy and muscle. A stump can live 300 years if its fellow bloods chip in on life support, roots connecting like electric cords. Once I paid to plant a tree in memory of my grandfather, one of the murdered, and to make the desert bloom. What blooms in a desert? Murder. As con men on the hilly, arid site uproot one group of saplings, so another day's busload of the bereaved will have some spade work to do. So when I started that poem, I didn't know how it was going to end. It's also a journey for me, as well as I hope for the reader. There's a saying, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. This next poem also comes out of a personal experience, like the one about the dry cleaner. This time it was at the Concord District Court. Nobody seems to like jury duty, though everyone says it's at the heart of our democracy. I've been called 5 times in 40 years, and I've only sat on a case once. This time I didn't. I brought a book to read while waiting, and some of the details of books I remembered surfaced here. That's not an unusual combo for me. Everyday experience plus details from reading, plus memory, plus a dream. This poem is called Jury Duty. Langston Hughes threw all his books into the Atlantic Ocean. Textbooks from Columbia, novels, poems. He decided to read people instead. Another writer jumped ship when he saw a fellow sailor wanted to kill him. There's always a way to die on a boat. Now I've appropriated 2 stories from 2 men, one black, one white. I could say I've boxed 100 books for the dumpster, or escaped from the car of a possible rapist, the Porsche still moving, and saw him on campus a number of times. Time numbs, or doesn't. Sitting in a jury room, ready to be excused or sworn, I study the fact of so much depends. One word against another, a record in black and white, we, the people, transcribe. If we're not dismissed, which is what the woman I read reading beside me hopes and desires. This next poem is about another trial. It's about the O.J. Simpson trial, which I would imagine some of you remember. I didn't pay much attention back in 1995. I was really blind to a lot of the issues of race and policing that were revealed in the trial. And when I finally watched the Netflix series, The People versus O.J. Simpson, a few years ago, I was mesmerized. This poem also mentions something called a chicken tractor, which is a roofed, screened box that's taller than the bird with no bottom. And you put the chickens in the chicken tractor and you can move them around in a field to get rid of pests as the chickens eat the bugs in a field that you may want to plant. This poem is written as a series of sentences. It's a prose poem. It uses paragraph breaks rather than line breaks. You could see it if you open the book. I can't see it if over Zoom. But let me read nullification, which refers to jury nullification, in which a jury makes a decision not necessarily based on the facts of a case. In a Facebook video, a bird flies at the feet of a man lifting fresh spadefuls of earth. The bird picks through each clod for a spasm of white worms, a breed that sucks the gardener's flowers dry. He turns the soil, edging the spade to guide the bird to the worms, the bird dipping its head. I know a farmer in Maine who used a chicken tractor to clear his acre of pests. The chickens in a bottomless wire cage rolled from one parcel to the next. At night, I stream a movie about O.J. Simpson. In the back seat of his Bronco, the juice presses a gun barrel to his head. Back then, Liz was in 4th grade. F. Lee Bailey's ex-wife was her teacher. I worked full-time, and friends obsessed with the trial confused me. Who doubts the guilt of a man caught beating his wife? I'd seen the Rodney King video and later trash cans spinning through windows, fires bulging, heard the clap of gunshots, grieving sirens. Who can't guess why a man wouldn't offer his wrists to the police? A rich Black man divorced from a white woman. The Metco student we hosted visited Thursday afternoons. Her mom sat her on a bus in Boston Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at 6 a.m., waited for her at 5 p.m. Sometimes the bus ran late, Ashley sleeping past her stop. The one Kardashian who wouldn't make a cent from his name is dead. Johnny Cochran, too. O.J. Simpson, paroled from a Nevada prison, will never get his trophies back. In the movie, the trial of the century lasts 9 months, long enough to have a baby. Not guilty, the jury longs to decide. The answer, their answer, to whether we can all get along is no. The Metco program at that time brought students from Boston into suburban schools. We lived in Lexington at the time, and 1/2 day a week, the girl I call Ashley here would stay with us until her bus left around 3:30 or 4, which was a long day for a 3rd grader. This next poem I'm going to read has to do with my living for part of the winter, not this winter though, by the Gulf Coast of Florida. I usually spend the winter down there. And in the spring, when I clean and close up the house for the summer, I found a single egg in a carton in the refrigerator. And that's what sparked the poem. What was I going to do with one egg? This poem is also written in sentences like the last one, paragraphs rather than lines. And the poem also includes some information about 2 Russian poets, Osip Mandelstam and Anna Akhmadaba. Mandelstam had written a poem criticizing Stalin. It's famous, it's known as the Stalin epigram. And in fact, one of my writing groups, Stephen Kramer, has a wonderful translation of it. Because of this, Mandelstam was exiled to Siberia. Akhmadaba was a friend of his. I think that's all you need to know. Egg. Who imagines the future as it will happen? Did Mandelstam think he'd die for comparing Stalin's fingers to grubs? The night of his arrest, his wife invited Akhmadaba for dinner and boiled her an egg. A fresh egg was a rare thing. Before the secret police took him, Mandelstam ate the egg Akhmadaba offered with salt. I cleaned the refrigerator before leaving the place I've lived for 6 months. There's a carton with 1 egg left. The look of hibiscus beguiled me and jasmine perfume for half a year. I cared for now, forget the future. Now, what should I do with this egg? Not enough for a meal, stale, maybe good for a batch of pancakes. My mother said wasting food is a sin. There are people on this planet, thousands, who die for an egg. Though at my age it won't, I assume the future will be like now. My friends would laugh if I gave them a single egg. Would my mother laugh, or her mother, widowed with 3 children? I dropped the egg. The disposal grinds it to a slurry that will be flushed and purified, mingled with the river and salting the sea. This is my lyric for failing to find one of the homeless vets camped by the river and giving him the egg. I kayaked once past a tent patched with a blue tarp, and Jeff, curious, wanted to paddle ashore. I could barely find breath to say no, so profound was the privacy of a sandy crescent between mangroves. A tent, a hibachi, a folding chair, a styrofoam cooler. Who could have dreamed this future? And an egg. What could one egg do to redeem it? Southwest Florida has a big homeless population, many of them veterans, many living in the woods on undeveloped parcels of land. There's more undeveloped land on the West Coast than the East Coast. And the man who pitched his tent on the edge of the Caloosahatchee lived about 3 miles from us. This is another poem about being in Florida. I'm retired and my husband Jeff isn't, so he spends part of the month with me when I'm down there for the winter. And when I'm there, I belong to a group in the town north of us, Punta Gorda. And we get together once a month to share poems written by other people, not by us. Everyone brings a poem. Each month there's a specific topic, like poems about animals or home or mothers, different topics each month. So I go there and I come back with a bunch of poems I hadn't read before, some by writers I've never heard of. So in this poem, my poetic license turns the poetry group into a book club. And you probably all know this, the white-throated sparrow's song is supposed to sound like Old Sam Peabody, Peabody, Peabody. And this is called Snowbird Song. In March, I Google words that will startle local book club women out of their bodies into tufts of moss, ferns unfurling, sedges grown inch by inch, the sparrows Peabody, Peabody. A New England spring, as far from the Gulf as apples from oranges. I left my volumes, Dickinson, Williams, Rich, in Massachusetts with you. Another faraway love I touch through wireless ether. Listen to, but can't inhale like earth after soaking equinoctial rain. I haven't seen a crocus burst its button from lacy snow, or forsythia bloom, or peepers pipe their lust in 4 winterless years. Tonight, waiting for my return, you hold your phone out the car window so I can hear. So I had a little fun with this poem because the poem that I brought to this poetry group is one by Jane Kenyon called The Clearing. And each element in this poem has a parallel element in hers, the tufts of moss, the ferns, the sparrow. And she's come back from a walk in her poem where she's noticed spring burgeoning and longs for her husband, Donald Hall, who's away, probably giving a poetry reading. This next poem is also about a poetry reading, more directly. One of my colleagues from UMass Boston, Jill McDonough, gave a reading at Middlesex Community College right down the road from here. And she read from her book, Habeas Corpus, which is a series of sonnets on American executions, starting with the Puritans and continuing into our century. Each 14-line poem contained the story of one criminal execution. And during the Q&A, one student asked Jill, what method she would recommend if she were going to be executed. And so there's a quote in this poem that was her response. On choosing one's manner of death. Time is short. After reading a few sonnets detailing American executions, a slave who poisoned her master, burned alive, a sailor who insisted on tying his own noose, the poet was asked, if she were condemned, what method would she pick? The quickest, she said. In Utah, they hold you down for a shot through the heart. Hanging, if the knot's done right, the rope taut and weight accounted for, is also fast. I thought of the story, or is it a joke, of the wise man captured by the great Khan, who then commanded him to choose his manner of death. Old age, the sage replied, and so gained his lord's protection for as many years as the Khan evaded plague, axe, venom, flame, and his clever sons. So my writing group made suggestions about the ending of this poem. At first I wrote joke, but they didn't think it was a joke, so I changed it to story, but I kept the joke in there. Story, or is it a joke? And they also helped me decide what a powerful Khan might be afraid of. So they did definitely created several images for the end of this poem. The next poem I'm going to read is something that I took almost completely from an article in Science Daily. I love reading about science, and like many poets, I love the precision of scientific language. This article reported how scientists thought life might be present on one of Saturn's moons, the moon Enceladus. And awe is a big thing for me, and I was really awed by the possibility. So again, the language for this comes very much from that article. Life on Enceladus. It's snowing all the time at the south pole of Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn with the loveliest name and the brightest object in the solar system, reflecting 98% of the sun's light, its surface like the best powder day. So cold, no life could multiply, except the orbit of Enceladus around Saturn is elliptical and squeezes the moon's interior to liquid and also what's frozen underneath the white mantle. So now and then a geyser of salt water sprays upward, and perhaps growing in the water, a litter of microbes as yet undiscovered, but possible. Its alien DNA unsullied because capped beneath ice and acres of snow deeper than Everest is high. Enceladus, like the white canvas of eternity, stroked by a brush with a single hair. My husband and I moved to Bedford after living in Lexington for almost 30 years. A lot of our furnishings were even older, and the carpet we used in our old living room didn't fit the new one. We tried to sell the carpet, but found antique oriental rugs are out of fashion and not worth much. And this poem moves in time as well as space, and the children of the buyers of our Lexington house didn't want to move either way. Hurries, The investment quality Oriental we thought would rise in value as we crushed it underfoot like grapes for an old vintage, or hopeless love that multiplies the more the lover's scorned. We store in the garage, cleaned and wrapped, an heirloom, waiting for an heir to roll it out. Antique, hand-knotted, hand-dyed, genuine Persian, the spice of New England rooms with butler's tables, wingbacks, armoire, and a spool bed where the boy jumping off called his friend's dad Mister. Who wants any part of it? Brown furniture, the dealers call that shit. Rug that wore like steel, absorbed our dog's vomit, Liz's poster paint, beer, soot from the fireplace. I miss its geometric reds and blues, the border's lopsided gazelle, deliberate in the 10 by 14 weave, imperfection meant to trick the evil eye. So far, evil's blinked at us. Our old house sold, not burnt or bulldozed by a mob. The buyer's girls walked silently, chin down, through their new rooms. Kids don't want to move, but they must. Oh, that actually is a happy ending to that Hurry's story. My husband's niece and her husband recently bought a house and they took it. So it will become someone else's heirloom. This next poem is called A Pair of Limmer Boots. And those of you who hike in New England might know that Limmer is a family company that makes by hand these precious hiking boots that to order that fit really well. And some people will tell me sometimes I have a great idea for a poem. And for me, poems usually don't start with ideas, though they often contain them. Usually for me, a poem starts with an image, something I see or I hear or I smell. Or sometimes it's a bit of language, as with the Enceladus poem, or a line of dialogue I overhear. But this poem started with an idea that occurred to me after cleaning out our basement. I grew up in a 4-room apartment in New York City where there was very little space to save anything. And my husband, Jeff, grew up in an arc of Victorian and Jamaica Plain. So he's a saver and I'm not. And sometimes I feel he goes overboard with the saving. But that's not the crux of what I want to write about in this poem, because at some point I realized that getting rid of stuff is an acknowledgement of change and of age, things that we weren't going to do again, whether it was raising bees or owning a sailboat or hiking the Appalachian Trail. The window for those activities had closed. And it's hard to face that. So I try to have a little more compassion now for Jeff's saving ways. A pair of Limmer boots. The life that required custom leather hiking boots is gone, and woolen cross-country knickers with knee-high socks. Clothes that used to fit for things we no longer do. I bagged them for goodwill, but you hid them with books on beekeeping, a boat hook, a ham radio. Not ready to admit that choice is narrow, that we can't recalculate our turns through the world's dark wood. You'd sent the shop in Intervale a tracing of each foot the year before they stopped taking orders. The night you crept down the cog railway's trestle, the great gulf of Mount Washington behind you. stars bright enough to glint from your metal lace hooks. What on that hike? Split before from after, like maternity smocks and baby clothes, or the mirrored dress I wore when we first met. My writing group also helped me with that poem in eliminating a list of things that were saved that I wanted to get rid of. The last poem I'm going to read is called Irish Music. And again, as you heard, a lot of poems come out of my reading. And this came out of an article, I think it was by Oliver Sacks, but I'm not sure, in the New Yorker about blindness and how some people who've had their sight restored found shapes and colors and perspective in a sighted world too much, too hard to decipher. And some preferred to go without sight, and some even had surgeries reversed. The second bit that I draw from is a novel called Still Alice, about a woman, an academic, experiencing early onset Alzheimer's. The details there are precise and scary. And I'm not sure how these pieces fit together in my mind. Maybe it's my need to reconcile two things I find terrifying. Art is a way of control, and in this poem, I can offer something to both characters. Irish music. A blind man with sight surgically restored can't recognize what he sees in blobs of color, puzzle shapes. He walks in a painting by Clay or Miro. With no depth perception, everything's flat. To a woman with Alzheimer's, a dark red rug looks like a hole in the floor, a bloody hole. She can't open her front door without stepping past it and won't let anyone in, except a blind man, maybe, who wouldn't notice anything amiss. In movies, a doctor unwraps enough bandages to succor a regiment before the big reveal. The hero can see again. In life, the newly sighted sometimes prefer darkness to looming abstractions accelerating past at hard to reckon speeds. So the operation is reversed, which allows the man to sit next to the demented woman, a sweet woman who loves Irish music, and hold her hand as long as it needs to be held. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening.
That was wonderful, Joyce. Thank you so much for this privilege. It's been great. And we'd like to open up the rest of the talk to Q&A. And I was wondering, Larry, if you could keep track of people who are in the participant list who raised their virtual hands, and I'll check the chat. And how does this work, Larry? Can they automatically unmute themselves?
Some are already unmuted, and others I will have to, others can unmute themselves without my interference. So if you create the queue, I will look for people who are raising their hands virtually and help you with that.
When you say create the queue, can you clarify just so I understand?
Who's first, who's after that. And so.
Okay, I'll check the chat as well. If people have any questions, if you can put them in the chat for everyone, and we'll call on you. If you want to wave wildly, just let us know that you want to say something.
Larry, John Gibbons here. I'll be another set of eyes with you. and people can also, if their icons are similar, under reactions, there is an iconic raise hand that way, or just wave your hand the old-fashioned way.
Great. I don't see anybody in the participant list raising a virtual hand. Should we just, let's see, anybody in the chat? Okay. Well, I just wanted to, before we, just to kick it off, I wanted to share, Joyce, I was moved by the poem whose name I've forgotten, about the homeless woman.
Oh, mhm. Because the
Because
scripture is not foreign, she is random. Yeah.
yeah, I was quite moved by that. And I've experienced that inner conflict as to how to handle such situations and acknowledge the humanity of the other person without hurting their pride and yet feeling safe. But the way that you articulate it is so moving.
Well,
So
thank you. Thank you.
Richard Lashak raised his hand and is already unmuted.
Hi, it's actually Meg. I just wanted to say how, I have to say, thrilling it's been to listen to the poems, because one of the things poems can do is they isolate and magnify something all at the same time. It's like you take such a precise, narrow look at something that explodes into the whole universe. And just I was struck especially by the poem about the West Florida, or no, it was the one about the New England spring. And I just, every line you read with the sense of what it looks like, what it feels like, what it smells like, it was like, oh yes, yes, yes. And after the constriction of the pandemic, it was like, oh boy, I remember, it was just, it's one of those things that poems can do. And
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful description of what I hope my poems do. And I thank you for sharing that.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Mike Achillian was next.
Hello, Joyce, and thank you very much for your reading. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
My question is, how, if at all, has your writing regimen changed over the years?
Oh, it's probably changed a lot, especially since I was working full time for many years. And so the time that I had to write was really between work, family stuff, raising a child, moments that were not so much stolen, but really had to be planned. I really had to be good about planning things. After I retired, I found I had more elbow room. And so I was able to relax a little bit, not trying necessarily to account for every single moment and saying, I have to get to work at this time because this is the only time I have today to do anything for my writing. So I would say that's been a major change, but I've never been, and I think it's different depending on what your writing discipline is. I think prose writers really have to hit the desk every day for a time, from what I've heard from people who write fiction or nonfiction. For poets, it's good to have certainly discipline. You don't want to go cold. You want to keep working. But I find some days I'll spend 4 hours, some days I'll spend 30 minutes, some days I'll be working on a number of things and spend 8 hours going back and forth between a number of poems. So I've never got up at 5 a.m. to write before the day started. Some people do that. But certainly my schedule has changed and my writing schedule has changed.
Thank you.
Anyone else in that who is waving wildly? Joyce, all these poems are from your
I saw actually someone I know, Monica McAllen.
Oh,
was waving.
wonderful. Sorry.
Someone
Yeah.
I know and have not seen for many, many years. So it's delightful to see you.
Well, it's wonderful to hear you read your poems, Joyce. I have the book.
Oh, great.
And I've been enjoying it. I was thinking about the poem that one of the group called attention to about the random woman. And one of the things that struck me about it was that the poet does not tell us what she actually decided to do.
Mhm.
And you've mentioned some of the issues that come up about opening poems and closing them.
Mhm.
I wondered if maybe you'd like to say a little more about ending poems, particularly where a narrative has been begun or a problem has been described, but we end somewhere. Not, I don't know if there are people who will say, but what happened?
Well, I think that's really a wonderful question. And part of it is that what happened was, literally happened was a little anticlimactic, is that someone came out of a neighboring store and took this woman by the elbow and brought her inside. So what happened was quite anticlimactic. I mean, I certainly did not want to end there. But I think, and this is part of what my writing group helped me with, was to end with the question and not to say what I did, and leave it with the judgment that I'm this timid person, and so what was I going to do? But I think there are many wonderful poems that leave the question open, and in a way leaving the answer to the question unsaid lets the reader participate even more in the poem and trying to sort of, well, what would I do in that situation, and what are the options, and it becomes more of a shared experience than just a reporting of the experience of the speaker of the poem.
Yeah.
Randy Courier and then Dot Bergen. Randy, you can unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joyce. I really enjoy it. I just felt it's such a gift to receive your reading. And I'm wondering about two things. One, about how you come to decide about the form. You talked about your line breaks and your paragraph breaks, or your friend's sonnets, and if that just comes out like the poem comes out, if there's something more formalized about how you decide that. And I'm also curious about how you decide when your poem is done.
Well, I can answer the last question. I decide that a poem is done when my friends Teresa Cater and Stephen Kramer tell me it's done. And really, seriously. The other thing, I go through a lot of trial and error in deciding what a poem is going to look like on the page. I don't write much in received forms. I don't really write sonnets or villanelles. I'm pretty much a free verse writer. So the decision on, okay, how long is that line going to be? Is the line going to be a verse line with a line break, or a prose line as a sentence? Really is trial and error. It starts with the ear, what sounds right, what rhythm seems right on the page. And then if that doesn't seem to be the way I hear it or want to hear it, then I experiment, make the line longer, make it shorter, make it prose. If it starts at prose, how would this sound if it were broken into units of verse? So I don't have a formula. It really is very much trial and error.
Thank you.
And Dot.
Well, I guess I'm following up on that idea a little bit. I was struck by the economy of your writing. The poems are all quite short, really. And some of them, I would like for them to have gone on longer. But clearly you have refined, and perhaps with the help of your fellow, the writers, you are very economical in your writing. And just as a little side note, I love the poem about the rug and either getting rid of things or holding on to things. And I hadn't thought of limmer boots in a century. So that was quite interesting.
Well, those boots were from the last century.
Right, yeah. But I think you are deliberately economical in your writing. Do you often start out with more and whittle it down to less?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked this question, because this also has to do with the writing group that I work with. And one of the things we do is go over things syllable by syllable to make things as concise as possible. We have a saying, a syllable saved is a syllable earned. And you wouldn't necessarily think that we get to that level, but we do. We try to make things as concise and sharp as possible. And I think that's what this concision does. It just sharpens a poem, sharpens the language so it becomes more memorable.
Anyone else? Well, thank you so much, Joyce. This has been so moving and engrossing. Larry, I was wondering if you could flip to the last slide of the deck, just so we can share information with people who joined us. If you're interested in obtaining a signed copy of Petition or her Joyce's previous book, it's the next one after that. There you go. Joyce, I have the email address correct, right? It's double F at the end?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you can email Joyce at her Gmail account, and she can then get back to you and find out which book or books you want to purchase, get your name and address, and give you the full price so you can send her a check. Anything else you'd like to add, Joyce, with regard to obtaining a copy of your book or books?
If you're interested in getting a signed copy, that's probably the best way to do it. If you're not necessarily interested in having me sign it, I've been directing people to go to the website of Porter Square Books in Cambridge and support an independent bookstore. So that's the other option.
Thank you. And finally, again, thank you. I just wanted to close the session. Larry, if you could go up to the preview of the upcoming Lyceum presentations. It's 2 above that. Yeah, one more right there. So for folks who enjoyed the talk by Joyce Peseroff, we have a monthly presentation. The next one is March 14th, and it will, let me just get to the list here, about Mary Baker Eddy in honor of Women's History Month. We have a cybersecurity talk on April 25th, and a week after that, because of the holiday season, we had to have these back to back. We have a talk by select women Bofa Malone about her escape to the US. She's a Cambodian immigrant who went into politics and is very interested in the refugee immigration situation here in the States as a result. So thank you, everyone. If you want to close the slides, Larry, just wanted to say one more thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, okay?
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here.
And
Bye.
thank you, Larry, for your assistance. We appreciate it.
Bye.